The morning of October 30, 1961 was cold, but the air over the Novaya Zemlya archipelago in the Arctic Ocean was about to reach temperatures that the Earth had not witnessed since its formation. On the tarmac of an airfield in the Kola Peninsula, a specially modified T-95V bomber sat idling, its engines a low rhythmic thrum against the permafrost. Beneath its belly hung a monster, a device so large it could not fit inside a standard bomb bay. It was 27 feet long, 7 feet wide, and weighed nearly 30 tons. This was not just a piece of military hardware, it was a statement. It was a warning whispered, then screamed to every capital city on the planet. The Kremlin wanted to prove, once and for all, that the Soviet Union possessed the capability to end human civilization at a moment's notice. This was the big one, a device designed to demonstrate the ultimate mastery of matter and energy. It was a weapon designed to end history itself. If detonated at its full capacity, it would not just destroy a city, it would erase a small nation. It would send a shockwave around the globe not once, but 3 times. Yet, as the pilots climbed into the cockpit, their skin painted with special reflective white lacquer to protect them from the thermal flash, the man who had birthed this monster was miles away, gripped by a quiet mounting dread. Andrei Sakharov, the golden boy of Soviet physics, had spent months in a feverish internal war. He had designed the most powerful weapon ever built, and now he was secretly working to ensure it was a shadow of what his leaders demanded. In the early 1950s, the Soviet state viewed Andrei Sakharov as their greatest intellectual asset. He was the quintessential Soviet scientist, brilliant beyond measure, seemingly obedient to the party line, and absolutely indispensable to the survival of the revolution. While other physicists struggled with the complex mathematics of thermonuclear fusion, Sakharov saw the patterns in the chaos. He possessed a physical intuition that allowed him to visualize the behavior of atoms under pressures found only in the hearts of stars. Recruited into the secret cities, isolated gated research hubs that appeared on no maps, Sakharov was given every resource the Soviet Union could muster. He was the primary architect of the third idea, the Soviet breakthrough that led to the creation of a true hydrogen bomb. He was a hero of socialist labor, a winner of the Stalin Prize, and a man who walked the halls of power with the top brass of the military. For years, Sakharov lived in a state of moral insulation. He believed the propaganda that a Soviet nuclear arsenal was the only thing preventing a Western imperialist invasion. He believed that by creating the most terrifying weapons imaginable, he was actually a man of peace, ensuring a balance of terror that would keep the guns silent. He was the loyal servant of the state, accelerating the arms race with a patriotic zeal that made him the darling of Nikita Khrushchev. But science has a way of stripping away illusions. As Sakharov calculated the fallout from atmospheric tests, as he looked at the data of poisoned soil and irradiated water, the loyal scientist began to see the blood on the blackboard. The project that would eventually break Sakharov's spirit was designated RDS-220. To the West, it would forever be known as the Tsar Bomba, the king of bombs. By 1961, Nikita Khrushchev was facing internal political pressure and external tensions over the Berlin crisis. He needed a spectacle. He ordered his scientists to build a bomb that surpassed anything the Americans had even dreamed of. He didn't want a tactical weapon, he wanted a diplomatic weapon. He wanted a bomb that would make the world tremble. The original design parameters were staggering. The yield. The bomb was designed to reach 100 megatons. To put that in perspective, it would be more than 3,000 times the power of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The scale. The fireball alone would be 5 miles wide. It would reach so high into the atmosphere that it would literally touch the edge of space. The fallout. Because of its immense size, the radioactive dirty footprint of a 100-megaton blast would contaminate thousands of square miles, rendering vast swaths of the Earth uninhabitable for generations. The Tsar Bomba was not meant to be practical. It was too heavy to be used as an actual missile warhead, and no bomber could carry it across the Atlantic and hope to return. It was a propaganda bomb, a psychological sledgehammer designed to prove that the Soviet Union was the master of the atom. But as Sakharov looked at the blueprints for the 100-megaton version, he realized he wasn't looking at a weapon of war, he was looking at a weapon of extinction. He saw the projected casualty maps, the global atmospheric poisoning, and the sheer mindless cruelty of the design. It was at this moment that the Soviet Union's most trusted scientist decided to become its most dangerous saboteur. Andrei Sakharov knew he could not simply refuse Khrushchev's order. In the Soviet Union of 1961, such defiance meant a one-way trip to the Lubyanka prison or a bullet in the basement. He had to be subtle. He had to use the very thing the state valued most, his intellect, to undermine the state's ambition. In the design of a hydrogen bomb, it's a multi-stage process. It uses a fission primary to trigger a fusion secondary. In the Tsar Bomba's original 100-megaton design, the outer layers were to be encased in uranium-238. When the fusion reaction began, the high-energy neutrons would cause this uranium jacket to undergo fission, doubling the yield of the bomb and creating a massive, lethal amount of radioactive fallout. Sakharov began a quiet, desperate campaign of persuasion. He met with the military commanders and the project leads, arguing not from a position of morality, which would have been ignored, but from a position of technical safety. He argued the aircraft would never survive. A 100-megaton blast would create a shockwave so powerful it would likely swat the aircraft out of the sky before it could reach a safe distance. He argued the fallout would kill Soviet citizens. He showed models proving that the radioactive cloud would drift back over the Russian mainland, poisoning the very people the bomb was supposed to protect. Under the guise of scientific optimization, Sakharov convinced the leadership to replace the uranium-238 with a lead jacket. Lead would not fission. It would act as a damper, absorbing the neutrons rather than reacting to them. By making this one change, Sakharov effectively cut the bomb's power in half, from 100 megatons down to 50. But more importantly, he eliminated 97% of the projected fallout. He had taken a dirty weapon of mass extinction and turned it into the cleanest nuclear explosion ever conducted relative to its yield. He had sabotaged the superweapon to save the world, and the Soviet leadership, blinded by the sheer scale of the 50-megaton result, never realized they had been outmaneuvered by their own genius. As the autumn of 1961 approached, the atmosphere inside the secret city of Arzamas-16 grew suffocating. While the military officers toasted to the impending glory of the Soviet state, Andrei Sakharov sat hunched over his slide rule and sheaves of classified calculations. As the lead architect of the RDS-220, he was seeing a terrifying reality that his colleagues, blinded by ideological fervor, chose to ignore. He wasn't just calculating a blast radius, he was calculating a legacy of poison. The physics were undeniable. At its full 100-megaton design, the Tsar Bomba relied on a three-stage process. The final stage involved a massive tamper of uranium-238. When the secondary fusion reaction ignited, it would release a literal flood of high-energy neutrons that would cause the uranium jacket to fission. This dirty reaction provided the final massive boost to the yield, but it came at a catastrophic cost. Sakharov realized that at full power, the bomb would poison vast regions of the Arctic. The radioactive isotopes released would be swept up by high-altitude winds, coating the Siberian tundra in a layer of invisible death, contaminate the global oceans. The fallout wouldn't respect borders. It would enter the water cycle, affecting every fishing ground from the North Sea to the Pacific, add measurable radiation to the entire planet. The sheer volume of carbon-14 and strontium-90 released would be enough to slightly but permanently alter the radioactive background of the Earth for every living thing. He looked at his notes and saw more than just numbers. He saw the faces of children not yet born who would carry the genetic toll of this single afternoon in October. This was not a weapon of defense. It was not a tool of deterrence. This was planetary suicide disguised as a diplomatic triumph. For the first time, the father of the Soviet hydrogen bomb saw his creation not as a shield, but as a shroud. Sakharov knew that a direct refusal was impossible. Nikita Khrushchev had already publicly boasted that the USSR would show the world a 100-megaton bomb. In the Soviet system, making the general secretary look like a liar was a death sentence. To save the world, Sakharov had to become a ghost in his own machine. He began to lobby for an engineering refinement. With a surgeon's precision, he targeted the bomb's third stage. He argued that the uranium-238 tamper, the very component that would provide the final 50 megatons of power and 99% of the radioactive fallout, was a liability. He presented his case with the cold, detached logic of a physicist. He told the military brass that a 100-megaton blast would likely knock the delivery aircraft out of the sky before the pilots could escape the thermal pulse. He suggested that by replacing the uranium with lead, they could maintain the prestige of the blast while ensuring the safety of the crew and minimizing the unnecessary contamination of Soviet territory. Officially, it was recorded as a technical adjustment to optimize the test parameters. In reality, it was an act of magnificent, silent sabotage. By replacing that uranium with lead, Sakharov effectively neutralized the dirty final stage. He cut the bomb's power in half, from 100 megatons down to 50, and reduced the total fallout by an incredible 97%. The most powerful weapon ever conceived by the human mind was deliberately crippled by its own creator. Sakharov performed a secret lobotomy on the Tsar, ensuring that while it would still scream, it would not poison the world forever. On October 30, 1961, at precisely 11:32 a.m., the weakened Tsar Bomba was released from a modified Tu-95V bomber over the Mitsushika Bay test range. A massive parachute designed to slow the bomb's descent and give the pilots a slim 50% chance of survival unfurled against the gray Arctic sky. When it detonated at an altitude of 4,000 meters, the result was still beyond anything the human eye was meant to witness. The fireball, a globe of plasma 5 miles wide, surged upward, reaching an altitude of 60 kilometers, touching the very edge of space. The shock wave. The blast was so powerful that it prevented the fireball from touching the ground. The pressure wave bounced off the Earth, lifting the explosion back into the air. The shock wave circled the entire globe 3 times, detected by sensors in every nation on Earth. The devastation. In the abandoned village of Severny, 55 kilometers from ground zero, every single building was leveled to the foundations. Windows shattered in districts as far as 900 kilometers. Even at half strength, it was the largest explosion in human history. The pilots of the Tu-95V felt their aircraft drop a full kilometer in the sky as the shock wave overtook them, the reflective white paint on the wings scorching in the infrared heat. Watching the telemetry back at the lab, Andrei Sakharov didn't feel pride. He felt a cold, crystalline clarity. He had witnessed the absolute limit of human violence. He had seen the sun brought to Earth, and he knew that this was as close to the edge of the abyss as humanity should ever be allowed to come. From that day forward, the man who built the bomb would spend every waking hour trying to ensure it was never used again, transforming from a state hero into the world's most dangerous dissident. In the immediate wake of the Tsar Bomba test, the Soviet military apparatus was jubilant. To the Politburo, Andrei Sakharov was more than a scientist. He was a titan who had gifted them the ultimate leverage. But as the mushroom cloud dissipated into the stratosphere, something inside Sakharov had fundamentally fractured. He had looked into the heart of a sun he created and seen not progress, but an end to all things. The golden boy of the secret cities began to do the one thing the Soviet system was not designed to handle. He began to speak his mind. Sakharov didn't just file technical reports anymore. He began writing manifestos. He started pulling at the threads of the regime's logic, questioning the very necessity of the arms race he had helped win. He spoke with a haunting, quiet authority on nuclear ethics. He argued that the power to destroy the biosphere carried a moral weight that transcended national borders or communist ideology. Global arms control. He became one of the primary drivers behind the 1963 Partial Test Ban Treaty, realizing that every atmospheric explosion was a slow-motion attack on the DNA of the human race. Human responsibility. He famously stated that a scientist could not be a mere tool of the state. They were responsible for the children who would inherit the world, or the ashes left behind. To the Kremlin, this was the ultimate betrayal. They had given him everything, dachas, servants, the highest medals of the Union, expecting total intellectual subservience in return. They could handle a spy or a common criminal, but they had no defense against a saint of the laboratory. The man who had built their ultimate weapon had transformed into their most dangerous critic, using the same brain that mastered fusion to dissect the failures of the Soviet soul. The transition from hero of socialist labor to enemy of the people was swift and brutal. The Soviet system, like the physics of the bomb itself, relied on total compression to function. When Sakharov began to expand, the state moved to crush him. First came the stripping of his privileges. The special phone lines were cut. The servants were replaced by KGB watchers. Then came the loss of his position. One of the greatest physicists in history was barred from his own laboratory and forbidden from discussing the very theories he had pioneered. But it was in the 1980s that the punishment reached its peak. For his public condemnation of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, Sakharov was arrested and sent into internal exile in Gorky, a closed city where foreigners were banned, and every move he made was monitored by a dedicated team of agents. He was silenced, his papers were seized, and his voice was erased from the Soviet press. He was watched. Microphones were planted in his walls. His wife, Elena Bonner, became his only link to the outside world. He was broken physically, but not mentally. Despite hunger strikes and forced feedings in state hospitals, he refused to recant. The irony was lost on the Politburo. The system could forgive a man for building a doomsday machine that could vaporize 10 million people in a heartbeat. It could even celebrate him for it, but it could never, under any circumstances, forgive a man for questioning whether that machine should exist. To the state, the bomb was a god, and Sakharov was a heretic. In the end, the Tsar Bomba was a biological dead end in the evolution of weaponry. It was too heavy to be a missile, too large to be a tactical threat, and too terrifying to ever use. No weapon of that scale was ever built again. The world had seen the edge of the cliff, and thanks in large part to the data Sakharov provided, both superpowers began the long, agonizing crawl back towards sanity. In 1975, Andrei Sakharov was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. He was the first Russian to receive it, but he was not allowed to travel to Oslo to collect it. The citation didn't mention the third idea or the lead tampers of Novaya Zemlya. It spoke of his struggle for human rights and his fearless personal commitment to the peace of mankind. He had won the prize not for a bomb, but for the moral courage it took to stop that bomb from becoming even worse. His life remains a testament to a truth that history rarely admits in its textbooks. Sometimes the person who saves the world isn't a soldier on a battlefield or a diplomat at a polished table. Sometimes it is the person standing closest to the button, the one who understands the math of the end, choosing, quietly, and at the cost of their own life, to make the machine weaker. Sakharov's greatest invention wasn't the hydrogen bomb. It was the realization that human conscience must always be more powerful than the atom. He died in 1989, just as the Berlin Wall was falling, living long enough to see the world begin to breathe again. A world that was still turning because a scientist had decided to sabotage his own masterpiece.